Thanks for joining in. My name is DJ Trishler, and I'm about to present my updated thesis proposal. It's called To Be Detourn: What's the Use of a Neighborhood Brand Identity? On the right there, you'll see some examples of place brand identities. These range from alleyways to downtown districts to cities and even states and countries. These are a few from Cincinnati. There's a lot written on this idea of place brand identity. These have started, probably think of Milton Glazer's I Love New York, and have evolved throughout the last 40 or so years. Recently, there's been a lot of criticism written about them, calling them a form of biopower or a way that neoliberalism is showing up in neighborhoods. I'd love to write more about that. There's already a lot there. There's also a lot written recently about the need for participatory processes in these public identities. And recently somebody wrote about using the double diamond and design thinking and human-centered ideas throughout the whole place brand process. And so people have written about that. I thought maybe these are things I would write about, but I think there's something more interesting to me that I'd like to write about that's missing. So this is the gap. There's sparse research on how place brand identities are used by stakeholders and residents compared to how they're meant to be used. And so these participatory processes ask questions like, what is the identity of the neighborhood? They don't often ask, why should we have a place brand identity and what would we use it for? And so that's where I'm curious, is how would citizens want to use this thing? How would residents rather want to use this thing? An example here is me using the Covington place brand identity. I saw that there was a problem of dog litter all over the neighborhood I lived in. And so I took their new logo in 2017. I appropriated it to have a hand holding a dog poop bag and used their typeface and whatnot. I put the sign up, screen printed it, everything, put it up. It was up for 3 months until the city took it down. And so my use isn't an accepted use of the identity. And so what are the uses? What are the uses outside the accepted uses? We'll talk about that here. So this thesis project examines how residents of East Price Hill use a neighborhood brand identity by giving them a kit of parts to assemble into projected uses. So my hypothesis is that there are multiple uses. They're heterodoxical compared to the intended use. And I'd like to flush that out and see how that shapes future place brand identity projects. The picture example here is not what I would do, but it's an example of a kit of parts. So I collect images from Price Hill and I collage them, images of trash, texture, and whatnot. And so I imagine collecting images of typefaces, colors, line, language even, words, and giving them to people as a kit, maybe digital and physical, and seeing how they rearrange them and assemble them and use them. Phase one is about how do we make it in a very light way. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm just trying to gather some kit parts for my kit. And so through participant observation, walking the neighborhood, image collection, my own and maybe even others, expert interviews, just, what do people who are in charge of these processes, designers and otherwise, what's the intended use, so that I can compare that later. And then that will drive my kit of parts. How's it used? Ultimately, I'd like to get 20 plus people, 20 plus responses. And I think that I could take that kit into a workshop, maybe a one-day workshop or a one-morning workshop or several of these workshops. Potentially I could give it out as a cultural probe too, if it's easier that way to just drop it off at somebody's house. I could survey people immediately afterwards just to get kind of the basic details, whether it's age, race, longevity in the neighborhood, or duration in the neighborhood, some quantitative data there, and then interviewing them for qualitative data as they hold up what they've generated. Then at phase three, code, categorize, and describe it, hopefully coming up with some new definitions for the discourse around these place brand identities and even the intentions of these place brand identities, comparing the different uses across the neighborhood, across what it's compared to from the research on what these things are intended use for. Oftentimes it's to attract capital, change reputation to attract capital. What about uses outside of capital? This is my schedule, and I'm collecting feedback from you, working towards IRB. I'm going to continue phase one as I've been working on it, because that can be done without IRB. and I'm going to continue my lit review. Also, it doesn't need an IRB to do that. There's a draft of my lit review below this video in Notion that you can continue to read further if you'd like to. It's a draft though. Thank you so much. I just wanted to end by showing you Detournement. Again, this is a word, I didn't say this, but this word comes from the Situationist in France, and it's the idea of appropriating identities, brands that are out there in the world to say something other than their intended use. And so here I am doing this to Sidewalk Detour and saying walk tour, as I was actually on a walk tour. And maybe these identities facilitate other uses of spaces and whatnot. Again, getting beyond capital potentially here, trying to stretch what this could be. So thank you. If you'd like to look at more on Notion, please do, and I appreciate any feedback that you have.